this is a common reaction we get. That's great. We're happy you have this culture and these core values, but that would never work at my company. And there's a book called Good to Great, which I would highly recommend, by Jim Collins, and he actually studied this and found that it actually doesn't matter what your core values are for your company. What matters is that you have them and that you commit to them, and that creates alignment within your company. So I'm not up here trying to say you guys should adopt Zappos' core values, more that you should figure out what core values you want for your company and really commit to them and get the whole organization aligned with them. So I want to talk about 7 steps for building a brand that matters, or sometimes when I speak at entrepreneur conferences, it's about 7 steps for getting to $1 billion in sales. But either way, it's really just about, what are the 7 steps that we found at Zappos that we believe got us to where we are today over basically, we're about to celebrate our 10-year anniversary. And the first one is just decide if that's something that you want to do, if you're interested in building a long-term sustainable brand. Because if you're just trying to build something that you want to sell in, whether it's 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, or even 5 years, you don't necessarily need to follow these steps. And the reason you have to decide is because there's a lot of decisions that you're going to have to make between short-term profits or revenue versus what's good for the brand in the long term and staying true to your brand. There was a time when what we were selling was a combination of what we had physically in our warehouse, and then the rest was what other people had in their warehouses. And there was a time when actually 25% of our revenue was from this from stuff that wasn't in our warehouse. So it was great from a financial perspective. We didn't have to carry inventory, and yet we could get all these sales. It was adding another, it was making up 25% of our sales. And then we all sat around one day and asked ourselves, what do we want to be when we grow up? Do we want to be about shoes, or do we want to be about something more meaningful? And we decided that we wanted to be about customer service, not just shoes. And so basically overnight, we decided, in order to stay true to that vision, to give up that 25% of revenue. And so we basically just turned it off. And that's just an example where we decided we were going for the long term. And that was actually a pretty tough decision at the time, because we weren't profitable at the time, but we knew it was the right thing to do for building a long-term brand. And we didn't have to do that. If our goal was basically just to try to build as much revenue or profit as we could in 3 or 4 years and then sell the company, then we probably would have made a different decision. Step number 2 is about figuring out your values and culture. And so I always thought that when we actually went through the whole process of figuring out our core values at Zappos, and this was just 3 or 4 years ago, the way we went about it was we asked the whole company, what should our core values be? And it actually it was a year-long process. We got feedback from a lot of employees. I combined them and then sent it back out, and then finally came up with our list of 10. And to me at the time, I remember thinking, we kind of have to do this because we're at a certain size now, but it felt like this is big company stuff, and almost bureaucratic stuff. And if I had people ask me what would I do differently if I had to do Zappos all over again, and what I would do differently is I would do this on day 1. It isn't big company stuff. It's actually probably one of the most important things that you can do, especially if you're a small team now, or starting out, or thinking of starting out. And it's actually a lot harder than you think, because coming up with values for the company and making sure that the rest of your team is on board with it, and actually being willing to pull the trigger in terms of who you do hire or don't hire, or who you do or don't fire based on those values. You really have to do a lot of thinking in terms of what do you actually stand for and what do you actually believe in. If you're actually just starting out, it's great because it's an opportunity to actually just think about what are your own personal values in life. And that's not something that I ever thought about before until basically recently. And I feel like I got kind of lucky in terms of the Zappos core values being pretty close to what my own personal core values are. But the easiest way, if you're just starting out or your company is still small, is just you figure out your own personal core values, do a lot of internal introspective thinking and so on, and just make those the same as the company's core values. And when your own personal core values and the company's core values are the same, then you don't have to worry about marketing, positioning statements or how you're going to brand yourself. Like you're just living the brand. And if you make sure that you hire people whose personal values are in line with the company's core values, then they just naturally start living the brand. And then you don't have to worry about only the PR department talking to the press. And that's actually something we don't worry about at Zappos, because when reporters come or prospective job candidates come, we'll take them on the tour, and then we just set them loose and say, go ahead, talk to whoever you want in the company. We don't care. Bathroom's over there, snack room's over there. Come find me when you're done. And we're not worried about an employee giving out an inconsistent message. So this would definitely be something that I would encourage all of you to really think about doing if you haven't done so already. Number 3 is about committing to transparency. If you've done step number 2, then number 3 just doesn't really, just comes naturally. And our whole belief is that a company's culture and a company's brand are really just two sides of the same coin. Like the brand may lag the culture, but eventually it's going to catch up. And so just as an example, think of the airline industry. Like not any specific airline, but the industry as a whole. What is the brand of that industry? And if you ask most people, they'd probably say something along the lines of bad customer service. And no specific airline decided, our brand is going to be about bad customer service, and yet that is actually the brand of the industry. And so we think just with this whole Web 2.0, Twitter, et cetera world, that really, because any unhappy or happy employee or customer can just post something and have that read by millions of people almost overnight, then really a company's culture and a company's brand are really just two sides of the same coin. So some examples of us being transparent. If you go to twitter.zappos.com, we've actually aggregated, we have about 400 employees on Twitter, and we've aggregated all their tweets together. Our only guidelines to them are just be real and use your best judgment. And we don't really tell them what to say or what not to say. We have a newsletter called Ask Anything where employees can literally do that. They ask about our financials or about what brands we might carry. We have an extranet for vendors where we work with 1,500 different vendors, and they can all log into our backend systems and view the exact same information that our own buyers can see. So they can view on-hand inventory, sales, turn, profitability, and markdowns, and so on. And one of the questions we get asked a lot is, aren't you worried that that information is going to get into the hands of competitors? And realistically, it probably does. Some of it does get into the hands of competitors, but on the flip side, we have an extra 1,500 pairs of eyes helping us manage our business, and our vendors notice things when they get the nightly sales reports that our own buyers may not notice, and they're not on our payroll, and we just think the benefits far outweigh the costs. I talked about just when we give tours or reporters come and visit, we're very open in sharing everything, and we don't really have specific policies in terms of you can only talk to this person or this person. And then we actually, to further try to be as transparent and share as much as possible, we launched a subscription service called ZapposInsights.com where you can actually go and find out what our actual interview questions are, or find out how we score calls, or find out how different departments work. And that's just part of our culture of being as transparent as possible. Step number 4 is about vision. And so I mentioned when we first started, really the vision was Zappos is going to be about selling shoes. And then we decided, okay, that's kind of self-limiting. After a few years, let's be about something bigger. And we decided on customer service so that we weren't limited to just a single product category. So that was the original motivation, but kind of a weird thing happened that we didn't expect when we decided we were going to be about customer service. That's what our brand was going to be about. And the weird thing that happened was that we found that employees were suddenly a lot more engaged in the company and a lot more passionate about our kind of mission and vision. And so what would you be, as an entrepreneur, what would you be passionate about for doing for 10 years, even if you never made a dime? Or if you have employees, then the question I would ask is, what's the larger vision and greater purpose in your employees' work that has meaning to them beyond just being number one in a certain market, beyond just money or profits? Because if you can figure out what the vision is in terms of a greater purpose and that you yourself are truly passionate about, like that passion just ends up translating over to the employees. Step number 5 is about building relationships. I don't know exactly why this is like, so I personally don't like networking events where the idea is to, try to trade business cards with people and try to find someone where they can help you out and you can help them out, and it ends up being a win-win in the short term. I'm really just more a fan of just trying to build relationships just because you're interested in someone as a person, and they don't even necessarily need to be from the business world. And for whatever reason, what I found just in my own personal life and business life is that if you actually build a relationship with someone in a very hard to predict way, usually 2 or 3 years down the line, there's something that happens where that person knows someone else, or something happens where it actually ends up being really beneficial to either yourself personally or to your business. And I don't know why it's 2 or 3 years, it just seems to happen that way. And looking back at the history of Zappos, like so many of the meaningful things in terms of what brought the company to the next level happened when you actually deconstruct it. It seems like complete random luck, and the luck happened as a result of something that was done 2 or 3 years earlier, as a result of a relationship that was built 2 to 3 years earlier. So this was something that I don't know why it works, but it does. And if you're actually just interested in people as opposed to what can they do for you. I was recently at an inauguration where Al Gore spoke, and he said, if you want to go quickly, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Another thing that I would do differently if I had to do Zappos all over again is I would hire more slowly and fire more quickly, because I know especially in the early days it's so tempting to just try to hire warm bodies to fill the seats, because there's so much work that needs to be done, and it seems like anyone is better than no one, when actually, especially in the early days, if you make a bad hire, that can really just send your company in the wrong direction and possibly have an effect that you may not be able to recover from, especially if you're not the type of company that is good about firing people. And firing people is always a very tough thing to do. And then the other thing is, if you really are building for the long term, then if you want, our goal at Zappos, and on one of our survey questions is actually, when we survey Zappos employees to find out how happy they are, is we ask them how likely they are to still be at Zappos 10 years from now. So and for us, we don't want employees to just be around for 2 or 3 years. We want them to be around for hopefully the rest of their lives. And so the only way that's going to happen is if they feel like they're growing and developing on an ongoing basis. And so one of the things that we've done at Zappos is we've really invested in training and developing employees on an ongoing basis, so that someone can start out as an entry-level employee and then over a 5 to 7 year period end up becoming a senior leader within the company, and then also still continue to learn and grow and develop beyond that. And then it's really just all about thinking long-term. And so and realizing that overnight successes are not really overnight. We've been at it for 10 years from Zappos, but even if it's not even just 10 years, prior to that, there was a link exchange experience. Prior to that, for myself personally, there was the pizza business, and prior to that, there were a lot of other things that I was involved in, some that worked out and some didn't, and that all of that is really just part of the path of getting to where you're going to eventually wind up. So wanted to take a quick step back and ask you guys to think about a question, which is, what is your goal in life, just yourself personally. And if you think about it, or you ask different people, they'll give different answers. Some people will say they want to grow a company or get a job or get a boyfriend or girlfriend. You ask them why, and then they'll give different reasons like, well, then I can make money. You ask why again, and then they say get married or so on, whatever. You ask why enough times, ask yourself why enough times. I think for most people it actually all comes down to the same answer, and that's people are ultimately just seeking happiness in life. And they may have different ideas of what makes them happy, but the ultimate goal of everything is happiness. So this is something that I've personally been interested in over the past year or so. I've been doing a lot of research on the science of happiness. So I'm not talking about the kind of Tony Robbins, like, just think positive and you'll be happy, but actually, there's an actual science behind happiness. Just like, and it's one of those things where, through all the research, the consistent thing has been that people are very bad at predicting what will actually make them happy. Most people think, once I get X, then I'll be happy, or once I achieve X, then I'll be happy. But if you look at the happiness levels of lottery winners, for example, look at it right before they won the lottery and look at it a year later, their happiness level is usually about the same or maybe even a little bit less. And so, whereas if you ask most people, would you be happy a year later if you won the lottery, most people would say yes. And so, for me, it's been, the reason I got interested in this was because, people are bad at predicting what will make them happy, and yet people don't really think much about it. They just think, I know what will make me happy. And I guess the analogy I use, it's kind of like training or running a marathon. Like, if you were going to, everyone here knows how to run, but you wouldn't just go run around on your own and then think that you'd be able to run a marathon the best you could a few months from now. There's actually a science behind running, and you either need to get a coach or do the research on your own. And so I think there's the same thing is true for happiness. So I just wanted to share, there's a science behind many of the things that you're doing in terms of business. And you're always learning about whether it's through research or reading or so on. There's science behind a lot of things in business in terms of customer acquisition, et cetera. What if the ultimate goal of everything is to be happy? What if you just devoted, I don't know what the right percentage is, but a small percentage of your time to actually learning about the science of happiness, and how much happier could you actually be if, like there's this whole thing of different things that people are trying to do in order to achieve happiness. What if through research you could actually just find a shortcut and avoid all that extra work to get to the happiness part? So that's why the science of happiness was interesting to me. So I just wanted to share really quickly a few different frameworks of happiness that I've learned about through the research. First is that happiness is really just about four things. It's about perceived control, perceived progress, connectedness, vision, / meaning being part of something bigger than yourself. And the interesting thing about this is it's interesting trying to think and apply it to your own personal life in terms of when you've been happy or when you've been unhappy, and whether and how that fits into this. But the other interesting thing is you can actually apply this to business as well. So for example, for perceived progress, when we hire people into our merchandising team, it used to be that they would join as a merchandising assistant, do that for 18 months, get certified, pass certain tests and so on, and then become an assistant buyer for 18 months and do all that, get certified, and then afterwards they would become a buyer, which is kind of a significant thing at Zappos. So it took 3 years to become a buyer at Zappos. And then we decided to break it up. And instead, when you first joined Zappos, you would become a merchandising assistant level 1 for 6 months. And then you'd become level 2 for 6 months, and then level 3 for 6 months, and then assistant buyer levels 1, 2, 3 for 6 months. So it took the exact same amount of time, took 3 years to become a buyer, and the certification process was actually exactly the same, all the things you had to accomplish, except because we broke it up into 6 month chunks instead of 18-month periods, we found that our employees were just much happier. So there's things that we've actually taken from each of these and applied them to business in terms of trying to make employees happier and in terms of trying to make customers happier. Another framework is Maslow's hierarchy. There's a book called Peak by Chip Conley, and he actually reduces it into 3 levels. But basically, for employees, for example, he talks about at the bottom level, employees think of their work as a job, and then the next level is career, and then the next level is calling. So our whole goal at Zappos for employees is we try to make sure we don't have employees there that are there just for a paycheck, and get them to go from job to career to calling. And then he does a similar thing for both investors and customers as well. And then another framework is that there's actually 3 types of happiness. The first type I like to call the rock star type of happiness, which is really just about chasing the next high. And it's great if you can sustain it, but the problem is that it's very hard to sustain unless you're a rock star. And so the other thing that the research has shown is that as soon as that source of stimuli goes away, actually your happiness level goes down back to where it was pretty quickly. It's basically the shortest lasting type of happiness. The second type is called flow or engagement, where for different people there's different activities where for some people maybe it's running or hiking or painting, and they're doing something for 3 hours, but it seems like only 20 minutes have passed. You just lose yourself in whatever you're doing. And kind of the suggestion around that is, well, notice whenever that happens and try to put yourself in environments or situations or change your job such that that type of thing is more likely to happen more often. And there's actually a book called Flow that talks a lot more about that. And they found that this actually lasts longer than the rock star type of happiness. And so it's something that a lot of people end up doing if they can find a job where they're always experiencing flow, or some sort of activity where they're always experiencing flow. The third type is actually the one that all the research has shown actually is the longest type of, longest lasting and most sustainable form of happiness, which is being part of something that has a higher purpose and has meaning. And so for a lot of people, that might be being really involved in some sort of charity or nonprofit, for example. And it's just about being part of something bigger than yourself. So, and this isn't really in terms of, oh, this is what you should do to be altruistic. Like, this is what the scientific research has actually shown is effective in terms of how long your happiness lasts, and it's actually the longest lasting type of happiness. And so the thing that most people do is they actually go after the rock star type of happiness, and they find that very hard to sustain, and then they figure once they have this idea that once they achieve the rock star type of happiness, then they can worry about the other two, when actually the proper strategy from a purely rational perspective is to go after the meaning and higher purpose first, and then once you have achieved that, then try to put yourself into situations where you achieve flow, and then once you've achieved both of those things, then going after the rock star type of happiness is just kind of icing on the cake. So some books I would recommend if you're interested in this, talked about Peak. Tribal Leadership talks about, they study different companies and looks at how cultures can be really effective for having companies really get to the next level, and part of that is having the culture built around a larger vision or a higher purpose beyond just profits or money. 4-Hour Work Week is about this guy who basically wanted to travel a lot, used to work really hard, long hours, so that he could save up to travel, and then decided to just shortcut that and just travel cheaply. And then Happiness Hypothesis is probably the most meaningful book I've read in the past 5 years, where he looks at different philosophers, religions, and cultures from different time periods, and each of them has a different idea of what happiness actually is. But then he compares it with actual scientific research studies that have been done, and basically either agrees with or disproves certain parts of that. So, just wanted to leave you with, just thinking about what % of your time, if the ultimate goal is happiness, do you want to spend thinking about the science of happiness? And then if you actually did learn something from it, if you actually did research that, how can you apply that to your business, your brand, and yourself? And if basically the consistent thing across all the research shown that being part of a vision or that has meaning and higher purpose leads to happiness, then think about not just for yourself, but for making your employees happier and therefore more productive. What is your company's higher purpose, and what is your higher purpose in life? And so, for Zappos, like, I'm not here tonight trying to sell more shoes or more clothes, but if you've taken something away in terms of how to make customers happy through better customer service, or how to make employees happier through company culture, or how to make yourself happier through being inspired to look into a little bit the science of happiness, then I'll have done my job of helping Zappos fulfill our higher purpose, which is really just about delivering happiness to the world. Thank you very much.